Alrighty, so I'm going to start today's lecture with modeling the liquid for the inside of my bottles. I think that's probably one of the most applicable things that I'll be going over for the variety of assignments that you guys have cooked up. So,
how do I get out of the solo object mode?
On the left-hand side, there's the S button. If you click and hold the S and go to none, first solo off.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So let's open my reference images to see if we have any direction as far as what our liquid should look like. So this is giving us a little bit of information. This one. Above here is where there is no liquid, and down here is where the liquid is present. And you can see that there's a good amount of darkening and a little bit of a shift in color. So this one we would possibly want to make a darker material. What do these look like? These ones look fairly dark and also fairly cloudy. There's not a whole lot of detail that we're seeing through this one. So that might be one route that we want to go. And then the last one. So this one's pretty good. This one again is a bit darker, but it's not as cloudy. There's still a good amount of detail in here. There's also even the bubbles along the top, but I think for simplicity's sake, I probably won't jump into doing the bubbles. We'll just pretend that this is a relatively still glass. So let's get started. I'll probably just be using this one as my reference. So to basically give a real quick rundown on how we will approach modeling the liquid is we are going to take the shape of the bottle on the inside and basically use that as our base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of my bottle, and I'm going to name this bottle liquid number 1. And I'm just going to solo this one for now by clicking the S on the left-hand side and going to Viewport Solo Hierarchy. And this is what we've got. And I won't need the materials for the bottle on this one. They'll get their own material soon enough. Actually, I'm going to delete the label but not the glass. So this way it's still relatively transparent. So I turned line mode on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the faces on the outside of the bottle, actually, and I'm just going to use my loop select. And I'm going to wind up deleting all of these. So, actually, oops. This is super tedious, but bear with me. And then I'm just going to delete all of these up here. Or I'm actually just going to hit delete for now. And then, oops, so that something on the inside was selected, which we don't want because we want all of the inside to be intact, at least for the time being. And because the beer doesn't come all the way up at the top, I'm actually going to stop kind of halfway along the neck, because I'm going to go for as if this was a sealed bottle, kind of from the brewery. So I'll probably stop here, kind of right along the segment. So everything up here above I'm going to delete. So I'm going to switch to my rectangle select and turn off only select visible elements here, and then this way I should be able to just marquee select all those and hit delete. So So now I'm left with basically the inside shell of like the top 3/4 of the bottle. And what I'll do is I'll just select all these, and so some of you guys I've illustrated the normals, or what the concept of normals are too, but just to reiterate for everyone, you see how some of this as it's selected looks blue and some of it looks orange. So typically, and I would say probably 99.99% of the time, you want your normals to be facing the proper way, and in this case orange is for outside. So this is kind of inside out, because this is what I want it to look like, where the orange selected faces are appearing outside and the blue sides of these selected faces are facing inside. This means, and this is important if you remember back to how I was sketching the glass bottle kind of up on the board, and when you trace a ray of light or anything that can see through this liquid, it's important that those normals are facing the proper direction. So I'm just gonna hit, in this case I'll undo. So to flip them, what I did was I did the command reverse normals, and you can find that by hitting U and then R for reverse normals. So UR. So now that these are set, basically what I want to do is I want to shrink them a tiny amount, because if you think of this, if you think of the liquid inside of a bottle as an object, it doesn't like intersect, it doesn't cross through the glass, it's kind of contained, it's within the glass. But it's not like, there's not some kind of magic bubble between them, they're basically squashed right up against each other. And it's kind of impossible, I guess, to replicate that exactly in 3D. So to get around it, we just scale it downwards like 0.001%. So the command, what I'm going to do is, I guess I'll just use the T key to show you guys for now. So if I take this bottle and I switch to the coordinates tab, and so the S ones, which are our scale, if I type in 0.999 for each of these, and then I turn my bottle back on by unsoloing. So I've got my bottle and my liquid, and then I'm just going to re-solo just these two. So if I switch back to normal viewing mode, and this is bottle liquid, so I'm just going to apply just a blank white material to the liquid in this case. So you can see kind of, if I turn on line mode, oops, so it'll be a little hard to see, but yeah, here we go. So I've kind of zoomed my camera in so close that we're kind of cutting through our object. In this line, oops, I have to leave my mouse the same spot, but if I use the pointing stick, this white line is actually the line of where our glass object is, and then this black line is where the object, or where the polygons for our liquid object are. So you can see that the liquid is just a tiny, and we're zoomed in really close. So this looks kind of bigger than it is, but really this is like, I don't know, a human hair's amount of scale. So with that settled, I can zoom back out, and you'll probably realize that I need a top for my liquid object, so I'm just going to turn my bottle off. This liquid object wouldn't have a hole in the top, so I'm just going to close that up. And I'm not just going to use the fill polygon hole tool, which I could just use this. It would work well enough. But one of those small little details that I really want to hammer hammer in and get you guys thinking of is if you have seen liquid like poured all the way up to like the very top of a glass, it's actually concave. There's like a slight amount of arc upwards actually, and that's because of well, that's just the surface tension. That's kind of like a scientific thing. So I'm going to actually add on a little bit of that rounding. So I'm going to undo the fill polygon hole, and I'm just going to extrude it ever so slightly. So I've got my extrude tool, and I don't want to extrude up. Nope. Why does this not want to behave? This button is grayed out when it shouldn't be. Well, the button I want to use is the maximum angle button, and there's a reason why I would like to show you guys. But for whatever reason, it's not behaving. Nope. Nope. Alright, so what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to extrude it. I'm going to actually enter in the value 0 in my extrude. And if you look really closely, you'll see that it makes an extrusion. If you kind of watch that orange line, you'll see a little bit of blue appear, which is letting you know that there's an extra line there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scale this inwards. And the reason I did this instead of the fill polygon hole tool is so that way I've got these edges right here, which at least for me and in my goal is a pretty important distinction. So I'm just going to extrude this again, and what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to use the weld tool. So I'm going to hit MQ because just that's that's the hotkey, and I'll weld these closed to get those back down to a single point. And then on just this edge right here, I'm just going to bevel this. So I'm just going to bevel this oh so slightly, and I'm going to give it a little bit of roundness, and then I'll pull this one up slightly and this one up slightly some more. And if I go to the side here, you'll see that it's very subtle, but there's just like a slight amount of roundness to this now, whereas before when it was perfectly flat, you can see here it's all flat along the top. And if I redo these commands, now there's just a little tiny bit of an arc. And because I deleted the polygons, you see all these extra crazy vertices that are just kind of hanging out being freeloaders. I'm just going to command all and then optimize these to get rid of those. Cool. So that's all cleaned up. So now I should be ready to make my liquid material for my beer. So I will start by deleting that temporary material, and I'm going to drag a copy of my bottle glass, and I'm going to name this bottle liquid. And on the transparency of this one, I think I'm going to turn my absorption color a bit down more to make it a little bit darker, and I'm going to increase my saturation a bit, because most beers have like a pretty rich amount of color, at least the kind of beer that I'm going for. If you had maybe like a champagne, like a white champagne or something, obviously you'd be picking a different color than me in this case, because you would want something lighter, something a little bit clearer. So this brown looks pretty beer-ish colored. So we're going to see what this looks like for the time being. And I'm just going to replace that material just by dragging it onto my liquid. And let's turn off solo, so that way everything comes back. Turn our bottle back on. and it's going to be hard to see, but I know that I am correct in saying that there's only one copy of this liquid currently. There would be no liquid in the second bottle. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my liquid to be a child of my bottle number 1, and then hopefully in my bottle instance I'm going to replace the instance, and hopefully this means that there should be beer in each bottle now. So I'm just going to check my render settings real quick, and then we'll render this and just verify that hopefully there's a liquid in our bottle. Yeah, so we can see something that's definitely in there, because up here is the fully transparent glass, and down here is the not fully transparent glass, where the contents of the liquid are. So I think I'm happy as far as the shape of that goes. I might want to adjust. I might actually want to lighten that color a little bit. Just kind of tweak that to try to bring back a little bit of that brightness. I'm gonna raise up my absorption distance a bit, because if you remember, kind of the rough rule of thumb for the absorption distance is you want it to be as thick as your material. And if you think of this liquid inside my bottle as an object, it's a good amount thicker than at least the glass piece of my bottle was. So I'm going to try maybe just something, just going to take a shot in the dark and punch in 40. And we'll just render this again and take a note. I'm not going to fully develop my liquid material just because of how much we've got to cover today. But I know that I'm just going to want to get it a little bit more transparent. I don't want it to be quite so dark. At least just personally, kind of for my artistic vision of what I want this bottle to look like, I don't want it to be a super dark beer for whatever reason. No. So if I flip between these, we can see a little something that's happening right kind of along the neck here where it's a little bit thinner. It's bringing in just a little bit of color and a little bit of brightness. So I know I'm going to want to push that further, but for the time being I think I'm just going to stick with it. This is where I would write myself a sticky note to come back later if I was working on this at work. Definitely keep track of stuff you want to revisit, stuff you're not happy with, if you've got to move on, so that way you can go back later. So that is the liquid. So now I'm going to do the bottle cap, because like I said, I want to give off the impression that my bottles are still sealed, still bottled from the factory or from the store. So let's go into making the cap then. So again, I'm just going to solo my bottle. And I like to make good use of the solo tool, personally, just because it allows you to just work a little bit more cleanly, a little bit more concisely in your viewport. And again, that solo button is just this S on the side. So let's start with the cap. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a disc, and I want to make sure that disc is a child object of the main bottle itself. So I'm going to hold Shift when I make this disc, so that way the disc pops up in my hierarchy, and you see the disc is visible over here. And don't worry about the material for now. The reason it has a material is because the object above it has one, and it itself does not have one. So actually, if that really bothered me, I could just drag kind of a placeholder white material on it. And because the bottle cap goes at the top of the bottle, I'm going to zero out these positions and then raise up my Y position, jump to my side view, go to something that's ever so slightly above the top of the bottle, and then shrink this down because the width should be just ever so slightly wider than the bottle. So switch to my line shading. So this is a couple more subdivisions than I need to in the disk segment category. I actually, for the way that I want to model this, I don't want any. I don't want the program to make any right here, I should say, because I'm going to make them myself. So I think the rotation segments I'm going to need to raise a bit. I'm not sure how high, because the rotation segments are going to help me recreate this crimping effect. I'm actually going to use the subdivisions present to model in these little dips. So I think that's good for now. I'm going to save real quick just in case I want to go back, or I could just drag a copy, turn that one off, just turn that off. So I'm going to edit this one, name it bottle cap. And what I want to do is maybe just lower it a tiny bit more, and I'm going to make my own knife cut. So switch to edges, switch to loop, and I'm going to make a cut kind of basically right along, not right up against the edge, but pretty close to the edge, and that looks pretty close. So now I'll just go to my loop select, check select boundary edge, so that way I can select this outside bit. And I'm just going to move this down because a bottle cap slopes downwards along the edges. So this looks pretty good for the time being. I can bevel this edge because my bottle cap is relatively rounded. So I want to make sure I'm accurately depicting that. Switch to my bevel tool. That looks pretty good for the time being. And to do this crimping effect, what I think I'm going to do is, I guess we'll see how it turns out, but I'm going to try, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select every other vertice here, and it's going to be super tedious. Oops, deselect that one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select every other side, and hopefully what I'll do is I'll be able to either scale them down slightly or move them downwards slightly. And this is why I added so many subdivisions, so that way I've got lots of edges to work with. So now that every other one is selected, we can scale these inwards. So I'm going to select the blue corner, so that way I select both the X and Z axes simultaneously. And I'm going to scale these down, not much, maybe 5% or so. That doesn't look too bad. And I don't want to move them downwards because a bottle cap, it's kind of flush along its edge. It's just the kind of width that creates this this bit of rounding. So with that done, it's not going to look too great if I switch back to line mode. If I just render this real quick, it's not going to look exactly the way that we want it to. It looks pretty kind of sharp. Well, actually, it looks very sharp. Sharper than a bottle cap even should be. So I'm going to use an object that we haven't used up to this point, and that is a subdivision surface. And what the subdivision surface object will do is it will basically smooth out this object. So the subdivision surface object is actually just this first green button, first one here. So I'm going to hold Alt, and now if I turn my lights off, oh, maybe turn one of them on. I'm trying to catch a good angle for you guys to demonstrate what's going on here. So I think this is pretty indicative of what's going on. So with the subdivision surface on, you can see that this kind of has a little bit of curvature to it. It's a little softer. And when I turn it off, it gets very chunky, very hard. So with it on and off, just kind of flip back and forth. And I'm turning the subdivision surface on and off by hitting Q, actually. That's a super obscure key command that isn't useful very often. So I think that works pretty good, and I'm just going to rename this bottle cap SDS for subdivision surface. For the time being, I think I'm pretty happy with that. But I know one thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to real quickly UV map my bottle cap, because I'm going to want to put my circular logo up on the bottle cap, because that's a pretty realistic thing to do. So I will just switch to my UV edit mode, scroll down, drag my object in, or drag my UVW tag into the UV editing panel. Kind of select, actually I'm going to turn off, it's a good idea to turn off the subdivision surface when you're doing this, just it gives you a little bit clearer of a view. And for the purpose of this, at least, the texture on my bottle cap would go in this center portion. It wouldn't really be bleeding off into the curved area kind of out here. So all those I'm actually just going to go to my polygon select, go to my loop select, oops, and I'm just going to select all these, and then switch to my UV polygon select. And I'm just going to scale these guys and move them out into the corner. I just want to get these guys out of the way, because I won't have a texture map or any sort of specific texture on those. So I want to maximize kind of the quality that my label texture will get. So I'm going to just enlarge this up. And again, it's important that I don't go outside of this kind of gray bounding box. I want to stay within, I want to keep these within this little grid here. So I think that's pretty good. Eventually when I get around to applying my label material, if it's as big as possible, that means the resolution will be most effectively utilized, and it'll come in hopefully super clear. So that's the bottle cap. If we just jump back to the startup layout and turn solo off, we see that we've got a bottle cap on both bottles. So let me just make a real quick kind of bronzy gold-ish looking material for this bottle cap, because I kind of like the look of this bottle. So I'm just gonna kind of rip that idea. So actually, I can probably just search the content browser for a gold material if I want to hope that it doesn't freeze. And it's important to save before you touch the content browser, just in case the computer becomes unhappy, like mine might have. Oh, there we go. All right, we're back. So I'm going to type in gold and just go to icons. So it looks like I've got a couple things to pick from. This one looks pretty cool. So I'm going to drag this down to my material editor. Move this over, name this bottle cap gold. And let's open this up and start to examine it. So diffusion is a layer that we haven't touched on much up to this point. But if I make this large for you guys, this preview window. With diffusion, it's not exactly like dirt, but you can kind of think of it as if it's almost kind of like a dirt or like a smudge. At least the more common uses of it. What diffusion is it's kind of roughening up or kind of altering the color and the reflection of this object. And it's definitely super hard to see up on the projector, but there's a little bit of kind of gray and white, just kind of noise in here. And if I check diffusion on and off, you'll see that there's kind of like a dirty, dark, kind of splotchy bit that comes on and off. So that might look cool once this refreshes. You'll kind of see it get a little bit darker once it, I think it already refreshed. So in reflectance, let's check out what's making it gold. Interesting. Well, I guess we can just apply this material and see what it ends up looking like. Bottle cap. Jump into my camera, render this. Now it gets a little bit tedious when you are rendering something that isn't in the middle of your scene, because like right here I have to wait until it gets up to the top where my bottle caps are, which is a little annoying. So that's a little too gold, I think, for my tastes. I can worry about the texture, kind of the label, a little bit down the road. So I'm going to pull some saturation out of that. No. Interesting. How is this set up? Alright, so I'm just going to pull down this strength value, which is kind of taking some of the color out of this material. So we're just going to render this again real quick, and then I'll move on. I'm still not really happy with that. I think what I'm going to try is, I made a material for my can. I'm going to try my can's metal material on the bottle caps. I think I'll be a little bit happier with that. So that'll be a little bit down the road here in this lecture. We'll get into the can material. I think next I need to model the kind of pull tab, the top for my can. Alright, so let's see if I have in my reference what the top of a can looks like. It looks like I do. Yeah, so we've got we've got the pull tab, and then we've got the area that folds inwards, kind of the cutout. So I guess we'll see how much detail exactly we want to work into our object. So I'm going to start with the pull tab, and I've got my reference image pulled up on my second monitor, which will come in very handy. So that way I don't have to constantly flip back and forth. So I'm going to select my can. Yeah. Just going to close up some of this. Can. And so I'm going to make a copy of my can because currently it's still a lathe object. And then that way I can go back and edit it if I need to. So this will be can 1 copy. And with this can selected, I made it editable, and then we can just solo this one. And alright, let's start to model the pull tab. So the pull tab is almost kind of this squarish, rectangular kind of shape. If you're thinking of it from top down, it's almost kind of rectangular shape with some holes cut into it. So let's start with a cube. Or actually, yeah, I think I'm going to start with I think I'll start with a cube. So again, I want this to be child. So I'm going to hold down Shift when I make the cube. You see the cube pops up as child. So I'm going to zero this out and then raise this up. And then shrink this down a lot, because this will be very, very thin in comparison. Very thin, actually. Shrink these down. Alright, so actually one side should come in a bit. And if we just work with this, I think that'll be a good start. So we'll make this cube editable. I'm just going to turn on my line mode for the time being. So I know because I want to make I need to make two cuts because there's kind of two holes in this object. I want to cut it down the middle. So I'm going to switch to my knife tool, switch to edge select. Use my trick to punch in 50%. So I moused over this edge and I tapped Shift till the line turned dark gray. So now I can punch in 50, get a nice even cut down the middle. And so now what I want to do is I want to select both of these and both of these edges, or polygons, sorry. Go to my inner Extrude Tool, and I want to uncheck, in this case, actually let me just do the command and we'll go over what the difference is. So what I want to do is I want to make an inner extrude and then delete out the middle, but you'll see now there's no center like kind of connecty bit right along the middle. There's a connecty part, so that's actually not present with the way that this was extruded. So I want to uncheck the button Preserve Groups, and you'll see why, because now what I can do is run that command again and I can delete these. And so now with a little bit of adjustment, kind of how these are shaped and sized, if I select these edges, if I scale them towards each other, you can start to see now I've got room for those two cutouts. Now obviously one's a little bit more square shaped and one's a little bit more circular shaped, but we can always make the necessary adjustments to create that. But it's going to be hard if I don't have that room in the middle. If I extrude it the first way that I showed, it'll be pretty tricky to add in those divisions. So the keen-eyed amongst you will probably recognize that now there is a hole kind of along these edges where I can see into my pull tab, which is not something I want. So the command I want is bridge. So I hit M and then B, and the command will now let me draw polygons that close up kind of this interior bit. So that way this, that way this object isn't hollow. There we go. So I'm going to leave one side a little bit more square shaped, and I'm going to round out the other side. So actually I think I'm going to try to bevel. I'm going to try bevel, and I guess we'll see how possibly poorly this fares. It might not be the exact command we want. So I'm actually just going to solo just this object now. So I'm going to go viewport solo single. That way I can look below this. So I selected these edges by hitting U and then B. So B is ring selection, which is a little bit different of a selection tool than we've used before. And I'm going to select these now. And I think that's all I want. Actually, I might want to select these outside four corners as well. I don't know. I guess we're going to see how well this works. This is very clearly not pre-recorded. Just kind of going with the flow. So with this selected, we're going to bevel, and we're just going to click and drag and see what we wind up getting. So this area up here doesn't look too bad, but there's some craziness happening, to say the least. So maybe I might undo that just a little bit, and I might try selecting these sides just to see if that makes that bevel a little bit kind of more coherent. Nope, it's actually doing something I definitely don't want it to do. So I'm going to undo that actually. Okay, so let's try this again. So I'm going to draw my bevel the size that I want it to be, and I'm going to try to edit some of these settings here with the tool. If this doesn't want to slide up, okay. So I'm going to go down to the topology section and mess around with some of these. I know that in some cases some of these have an impact on the way that this bevels. You can kind of see that over here. It's definitely doing something over here. See if any of these benefit me. Nope, that definitely made it worse. And it's super hard to know what every single one of these buttons is going to do on every single tool. Almost to the point where I don't think anyone would be able to know every single function of every single tool. So sometimes it can be a useful learning exercise to run a command, and if it does something weird, to just try to mess around with some of these buttons. You can always go back or make a copy and undo if you have to. So that didn't seem to work too great. So now I think what I'll try to do, so I'm going to try to unselect these edges here, because these ones seem to be the troublemakers. We'll run this bevel command again. So that's looking a lot better, less problematic. I think I'm pretty happy with that actually. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So one thing I will do is I'm actually going to select some of these, and just because I want to, I think this kind of narrows in ever so slightly. kind of the outside edge of this has got just a little bit of curvature to it. So I'm going to select those and move those over just to give this a little bit more roundedness. That didn't look good. And then if I view this from the top, yeah, this is just a little bit more kind of concave than it was before. So the last little bit, I think, for the pull tab will be the tiny little spot right here that kind of gets pinned or riveted down to the can. So that is kind of this piece right here, I think. So I'm going to extrude out this a little bit and then scale this inwards kind of a bit. Just kind of pull it into place and then move it down, I think. So then this way what I'll be able to do is kind of angle the whole thing slightly, and it should look like kind of an unopened pull tab. Scale this down just a little bit because this spot does get extremely flat, kind of crimped down. So that hopefully doesn't look too bad. So now I'm going to move this whole object kind of down a bit and zoom in and just kind of eyeball it for now. That looks pretty good. Now it's not going to be, I don't think they're centered. I think they're slightly off center, actually. So I'm going to pull this over. I think that looks a little bit more accurate. And then now, what I can do here on this cube is give myself just a little bit of room here to make the kind of mouth opening. I think what I'll do for that is select these. Actually, no, what I want to do is I want to make a couple cuts on my knife tool, actually, before I start messing around. I think I'll make a cut kind of right along there and right along here, and what those hopefully should be is kind of this outer sort of rim to give me a little bit of room, because this kind of mouth opening wouldn't come all the way out to the edge of the can here. So let's select some polygons. So I think that looks pretty good, at least as kind of approximating the shape of the pull tab. So what I'll do is, with those selected, I'm going to run an inner extrude. Oopsies. I want to recheck preserve groups, because if I uncheck it, you'll see that this is doing something crazy. And when I go to move these up, it's going to definitely not look the way that I want it to look. That is definitely not what the mouth opening of a can looks like. So we're going to undo that.
Unless it's Japanese.
Who knows what it looks like then. So we're going to run this command again. I think that looks pretty good. So now what I want to do is, with this outer loop selected, so this is kind of the rim, kind of the outer, there's kind of a little bit of an outer raised portion. It's super slight, but it's there. Again, it's those little details. So I'm going to select this little outside rim, and I'm going to extrude this upwards ever so slightly. Just a super not drastic amount, just very, very slightly. Nope. So now I need to round this out a little bit, and it'll be a little challenging to figure out how to scale this correctly. So I'm going to select one edge at a time. So the inside edge, scale that a little, scale the outer edge inwards a little. And let's just see kind of at a glance what this made this look like. A little crazy, to say the least. So if I edit my Fong Angle tag, which is this tag with the two little orange dots, basically what the Fong, or what a Fong Angle is it's almost like a smoothing amount. At what kind of curvature do you want something to look smooth? So if I lower this, actually I think I'll get this to look a little bit less pinched, possibly. Alright, so let's save real quick. And I think I'm going to need to put this object as well into a subdivision surface. So there we go. That looks pretty good now, I'd say. This little rim would give just the ever so slight little bump that is present on most of the cans. And with that subdivision surface, it definitely helped round out my pull tab a little. It's not kind of exactly proportioned right, but I think that's close enough. Number 1. I think I'm going to be pretty happy with that for the time being. What's next? So I'll need to make a label for my can, and I'm going to use the same graphic that I used for my bottle, but I'll probably, just for the sake of this lecture, I'll probably skip putting the label on. I'm going to need to UV map this outer portion of the can, much the same way that we did the bottle. So in my case, the label would probably go on these polygons. If you think of, I think my label is probably going to look a little bit closer to this orange can that's off to the side, where I'm not going to have anything written along this upper kind of rim, kind of like how this blue one has some text here. I don't think I really need to do that. I've just got a circular logo that I'm going to slap on the flat side. So I'm going to leave all these curved parts alone when I UV map this. So I'm going to hit UI to invert select, and then I'm just going to scale all these bad boys down to the corner and get them out of the way. And then we'll do the old checkered material trick real quick. So this looks close, but it's a little stretched width-wise. I can just tell. So I know I'm going to want to go to my non-uniform scale, and I think I want to scale this way till they get a little bit more squared-like. Can I use one of these commands? No. There we go. Yeah, I can actually just go to the optimal mapping tab, select realign, and then click apply, and it'll maximize them for me. And these look properly proportioned. So my can is ready for the label, which is good. I would make the texture, do the UV snapshot, do all that, bring the UV snapshot into Photoshop, proportion and place my label here within the UV snapshot. I may have to rotate it a little bit or kind of alter it slightly, but that is all stuff that we covered on the bottle. You guys are pros at that now, so we can move on to the material for the can. So I need to make this a little bit more of a silver material. I've kind of just got this brown for the time being. So I'm going to make a copy, and instead of making this brown, can silver. I'm going to go to my color and just pull the saturation out of this. Turn that gray again, maybe a little bit brighter, because in my reference, this shiny bit of this can it doesn't have any color to it. It's just the reflection. I mean, it doesn't have any like hue to the color. So I'm going to pull these saturation and hue values out. And one thing you'll notice in my reflectance, on my reflectance layer, is my roughness is up a pretty good amount. And that is because even though this is relatively reflective, it's not mirror-like, it's not chrome-like. It's kind of more of a brushed, kind of roughened up aluminum. So that's why I've got my roughness raised a good amount. And so I will place my can material on my can, place my can silver material on my pull tab as well, and some crazy stuff looks like it's happening in our UV snapshot. So we might just move on past that. No. So the can selected, the polygon selected. So with these polygons selected, I want to apply this kind of brown material. This will be my label texture, kind of stand-in for the time being. I'm going to apply this to just the selected polygons by dragging and dropping. And so now, if we jump and render, hopefully we'll have a brown area. Oops. We'll have a brown area where the label should be, and a silver material where everywhere else that isn't the label. Nope, it's black. Interesting. So I'll delete that. There we go. That'll work now. So that's looking pretty good, I think. The silver is pretty reflective, and I think pretty close to the amount of reflectivity and or roughness to it. So I think I'll move on for the time being. And save.